Hello everyone, please tell me. Which city are you listening from? What time is it there? It came on a night so soft with rain that the apartment seemed to breathe in a slow, steady rhythm. The sound of water had a way of smoothing the edges of everything. The city's harsher noises pushed back, horns and footsteps becoming a distant wash behind the window glass. I had my lamp dimmed low, the pool of light small and warm on the coffee table, and the rest of the room was a comforting blur of shadow and familiar objects. A stack of books I kept meaning to finish, an old plant that refused to die, the crooked frame with a photograph of a holiday I can't remember being very happy on. I was not expecting anything to disturb the hush. I was not expecting the phone to buzz. When it did, the vibration against the wooden arm of the chair felt like a polite, private sound, normal in the way of small domestic things. I reached for it without thinking, the screen lighting my face in that way phones do, the room shrinking to the rectangle of glass. The notification said unknown number. That would have been the end of it on most nights, a spam message, a wrong number, something to be ignored. But the preview showed an image, and the image was a view I knew with the strange intimacy of objects that have been lived with for years. It was my room. I didn't at first want to believe it. Photos can be taken 100 ways, and the mind is a good forger of explanations when it wants to be kind. Maybe someone had seen a photo on social media and re-photographed it. Maybe I'd posted a picture once in a rare mood of sharing and had forgotten. But the angle in the photograph was very specific. It looked from the corner by the wardrobe, just above where the little stack of postcards sits. Angled down across the bed so the duvet's folded ripple and the exact crease by the pillow were visible. Not a staged shot, not a stock image. The curtain in the photo was drawn as it was that evening. The same soft crease in the fabric where the light from the street lamp presses through in a thin band. The lamp on the bedside table was off in the picture, but there was a glow from elsewhere, a reflection that matched the way my lamp reflected against the inside glass. My stomach made a small, quiet drop. I scrolled the image larger. There, on the dresser, was the tiny blue ceramic elephant my sister bought me and the coffee mug with the chipped rim that I prefer to the unchipped ones. I could see, even, the way the corner of the rug had curled up under the bed frame. There was no doubt about it. The photograph had been taken from inside my room. It's strange, writing it down later, how quickly my brain marched toward practicalities. Lock the doors, check the window latches, call someone. But in that first minute, the world narrowed into a quiet room and the low, steady sound of rain, and my hands moved with the practiced gentleness of little domestic rituals. I tucked the blanket tighter around my knees, not because I was cold, but because it felt like an anchor. I stood and walked slowly to the bedroom door, careful to make no sudden noises that might break the fragile logic I was trying to hold together. The hallway outside my apartment smelled faintly of wet concrete from the building's stairwell. The stairwell light blinked its tired, reassuring yellow through the translucent glass. The lock made its accustomed click. Nothing was wrong. The window was closed and latched, the balcony door sealed. I peered out through the blinds and watched the rain smear the city into watercolor. No shapes moved on the street below except for the slow drag of headlights through the wet. Nothing obvious, nothing theatrical. No shadowy figure crossing my balcony or someone tapping at the glass. The photo should have been a prank, a mistake. And yet every ordinary thing felt like evidence against the idea that this was random. I sat back down and replayed the image in my head, like rewinding a small, intimate film. The photograph had included a tiny detail I had not expected anyone to notice. The open book on the bedside table, the page folded down at a different paragraph than the one I was reading before I drifted off. I had not posted that photograph anywhere. I hadn't even shown anyone the book. It was a private hinge where the world of my thoughts met the physical room, a notch of daily habit. The book's title was visible in the image, a worn copy of a novel my father once read to me as if we were both still children. The realization that the sender had angled the lens to include that book, to record that specific snapshot of my life, sank like something cold and patient into me. I felt, with a new clarity, observed, not simply seen, but watched with the kind of patient attention someone pays when they are making a map of a place they plan to return to. I considered my options with a measured, reluctant calm. I could call the number, confront whoever was there with my voice. I could report the image, contact police, explain as carefully and as plainly as possible. The rational list of steps unfolded and then squinted at me like a neighbor asking for help in the rain. None of them had an answer strong enough for what I felt. Instead, I did something smaller and quieter. I replied to the message with a single question: "Who are you?" It felt ridiculous in a room that had always been my retreat. But there is a strange human soft spot where curiosity and fear meet. And I wanted to know the tone of the person who had looked at my room and decided to photograph it. The typing was clumsy. My hands felt as if they belonged to someone who was not used to being the protagonist of a story. The send icon pulsed once, and nothing happened for a handful of long heartbeats. In the silence, the rain sounded very close, as if leaning in to listen. The reply arrived, not with the clipped, aggressive impatience of a spam bot, but the deliberate, patient cadence of someone comfortable in slow conversation. It simply said, "I'm inside." The text did not include flourish, no taunt, no image. A simple, domestic sentence, as if saying it would make it less impossible. The carpet underfoot felt suddenly too close, the edges of the cushions too soft, as if the apartment had become a jewelry box whose lid might be lifted at any moment. My mouth made a small dry sound, and in that tiny noise I could hear my own fear. I told myself out loud, in a whisper that the rain swallowed, that it was a lie. That people say things. That numbers can belong to pranksters and ex-partners and people with a cruel sense of humor. But I also checked the locks again, because ritual gives the mind something to do when the heart races. There was a softness in the second message that I did not expect. The sender, still unknown, sent another photograph. I was not sure why I opened it. Perhaps I wanted proof that this was a prank. Perhaps I hoped to find in the pixels some ridiculous tell that would explain everything: a filter, a watermark, a reflection revealing an off-camera friend holding fisheye lenses. Instead, the second image was worse in its intimacy than the first. It showed the same room, but from a slightly different angle, lower this time, as if the phone had been placed on the edge of the dresser with the camera tilted up. In the foreground, On the bedside table, there was a small silver frame with a picture of my mother and me when I was small. A snapshot I had kept because her mouth in that picture showed the exact curve she used whenever she laughed at something private. In the inset of the photograph, the silver frame glinted with imperfect light. If you looked closely, behind the glint, the reflective surface of the frame contained a faint double image, the faint blur of a person standing in the doorway, too dark and indistinct to make out detail, like a stain of shadow. My first instinct was to dismiss it as artifact, glare from the lamp, a trick of pixels. My second instinct was to stand up and move to the doorway and see if anything in that corner disturbed the feed of reality. I moved slowly, practiced a quietness I'd used in houses where babies sleep, where cats nap, where you don't want to startle someone. The doorway was empty. The hallway beyond was the same neutral gray upon which the city painted its glowing blotches. I checked the reflection in the glass of the framed photo, a reflexive move, and saw only my own face, pale and oddly calm beneath the lamp's glow. If anyone needed to know how fear mutates, they could study the way my curiosity softened into a compulsive need to corroborate. I started small, in the practical, ridiculous way humans do when trying to prove to themselves they had not been invaded by madness. I moved furniture a fractional degree so that the layout in the room no longer matched the photos. The coffee mug was shifted 3 inches to the left. The postcards slipped under the elephant. The book opened to a different page and left there to sag. I sat down and watched the blinds, watching the rain, my breathing attempting to follow the rhythm outside. For an hour, nothing happened. The apartment held its hush like an old secret. Even my phone's battery icon seemed to blink with a stubborn, ordinary indifference. I half expected the unknown sender to reply with a single picture of my hand on the altered book. Some precise note that showed an attention to tiny shifts. Nothing came. Relief flushed me with a small, guilty warmth. Perhaps it truly had been a mistake. A stolen image pasted from a social feed. I put the phone face down, the dark glass a small weight on the table. Then, at 3 in the morning, the phone buzzed again and I awoke as if a hand had tapped my shoulder. The apartment felt a degree colder, a fragment of the night settling like dust through the rooms. I picked up the phone and in the glow of the screen there was a new message, a single photo, taken from a low angle at the foot of my bed. The sheet rippled as it always does where I sleep, and in the middle of the bed was the exact indent my body makes. The timestamp on the image was not the present time, it was earlier in the night, an hour and 15 minutes before I had even received the first image. The image captured the slow sleeping arc of my form, peaceful and utterly unguarded. In the corner of the frame, the bedroom door was a dark rectangle, marginally ajar. The photo was taken while I slept. My heart thudded against my ribs like a small animal. I checked my phone's lock screen for the time, then checked the photo's metadata, fingers fumbling. In the exit there was no obvious sign of manipulation. No app tags, no filters. I felt the surface of the world slide just a fraction. My own sleep, my own private hours, had been recorded from within my home. It was a quiet, intimate violation, and it cut through the soft rain sound like a glass note. What followed was not a cascade of screams or a cinematic rush of doors flung open. The way these things happen in real life, and in this telling, is more subtle and corrosive. A slow rearrangement of the ordinary. I became more meticulous with small rituals, like someone who learns to measure a room by his breath. I unplugged external lights. I left the bathroom light on so it would pour a thin bar of safe brightness into the hallway. I draped a towel over the bedroom keyhole even though I had no key left to turn, and sat with the radio low. The static, a thin, companionable companion. I started recording short, silent video on my phone at the foot of the bed before I slept, set to capture the doorway. The first recordings showed nothing but the slow sway of curtains and the omnipresent rain as it blotted the window. Yet every time I reviewed them in the morning, my stomach would tighten because the recordings felt like they had a gap. A blank 30 seconds where the image stuttered as if blinking. It was maddeningly ordinary. A minor lag, an upload error, perhaps a reflection. Rationality offered itself in small, plausible robes, and I took those robes sometimes, but not always. Days and small nights accumulated, and the messages continued with an almost clinical patience. Sometimes they were photographs that captured the room in ways I hadn't thought to notice. The dust on the ledge that catches the light like a constellation. The way the curtains fold when the wind from the open window moves them. The particular bend the lamp's cord takes when it arcs behind a stack of magazines. Other times, the images were of me from angles I hadn't imagined were visible. My profile, as I washed a mug, my feet propped on the couch while I read. The sender's words remained sparse. Occasionally they typed a line that read like a statement of fact. You put the kettle on at 6:10. You forgot to close the balcony this afternoon. Their language was not threatening. It was a domestic chronicle. It was the kind of thing a meticulous roommate or an obsessed archivist might say. The strangeness was that no one in my life could have known some of these details. Friends who knew my habits were away that week. I had been careful, or thought I had been, to lock personal things away. I started to walk my apartment like someone touring a museum in which the works are placed slightly off. I learned to notice my own movements the way you notice footprints in fresh snow. Their direction, their pressure. There were moments when the feeling of being watched folded into other, more human feelings. Shame at the private routines exposed. A slow grief for the sudden, brusque theft of solitude. A smaller, more tender dread when photos captured items that reminded me of people I had lost. The sender photographed a small handkerchief my grandmother embroidered and sent the image with no comment. They photographed the coffee stain on the kitchen counter that I had avoided cleaning because I liked the way its accidental ring looked like a small, abstract map. Little personal things were highlighted. It felt designed to erode my privacy in increments, rather than to frighten outright. It worked. There was a gnawing sensation under everything, as if the sender was not only showing me what they had seen but cataloging a history I had not consented to provide. I eventually confided in a neighbor, the kind who lived across the hall and who fed my cat when I traveled. The neighbor's name was Sam, a quiet person with a laugh that came out small and genuine. And he listened in the hallway in his slippers as the rain made small, concentric circles against the building's eaves. I showed him the photographs and the messages, the metadata and the oddities. He said the right things, Lock the windows. Call the police if you feel endangered. Don't interact with them. He told me he could put a light capturing camera on the corridor that pointed to my door. He was practical. He was kind. The leash of comfort that his presence offered was brief but real. I went to bed that night with the door heavier locked and Sam's soft neighborly reassurance like a hand on the small of my back. The camera outside recorded a few nights. It showed only the comings and goings of residents and the occasional package left at the door. Nothing strange. The apartment building's security log showed no signs of forced entry. The landlord came and checked the locks and the balcony latch and found them to be robustly ordinary. And still, on the third night, after Sam's camera had been installed, I received a new photo at 2:12 in the morning, a grainy shot of the building's hallway, taken from an angle that could only have been just outside my door. But the photo contained a sliver of something invisible on the building camera's recorded footage, a smear, a blink, an absence of data for half a second. When I reported the messages to the police, they were helpful in the official way an institution can be: forms, an officer's badge reflecting the fluorescent lights, a promise to look into it. They suggested digital forensics and gave me a number to call if anything escalated. I followed their instructions because people give instructions and you follow them. And because when you hand your fear to a public service, it feels like you've put it down in a safe place. They traced the number as far as they could and returned with a polite shrug. The sender's number was spoofed, rerouted through servers, and showed no clear origin. The officer took a printout of the images and nodded solemnly. He did not roll his eyes or scoff. He looked like someone who had seen things he could not explain and had learned to hide his surprise behind paperwork. It did not make me feel better. If anything, it extended the uncanny feeling into the world of institutions. The documentation makes the experience real in a way that is both necessary and oddly final. Perhaps the most corrosive element of all of this was how it altered my relationship with my own memories. When you know someone has recorded your room, the things you remember as private begin to feel like items in a public archive. I found myself re-examining photographs of the apartment I took in earlier years, cataloging who had been in the images, what details were visible. I thought of the person who had once rented the flat downstairs and how they might have been in the habit of leaving their door slightly ajar during the day. I thought of the building's old maintenance hatch and the way a neighbor once asked if I minded that the painters had drilled a small hole for ventilation behind the wardrobe. Each recollection, which had once felt like a private hallway, turned into a chain of plausible opportunities. The human brain is industrious at this. It will make maps of how breaches could be committed, and yet there were moments that no map could account for. There was an evening when I found on my doorstep a single photograph printed on cheap, glossy paper. It had no return address and no message. The image was of the outside of my apartment, the view from the street looking up, and printed on it was a small note in handwriting I did not recognize. "You look comfortable." The handwriting was careful and rounded. The paper smelled faintly of rain and toner. I held it in the rain of the hallway and felt a curious, absolute sorrow for myself, not because I had been watched, but because the watching had become somehow a mirror. I realized I had become the subject of someone else's narrative, and their narration of me was meticulous and patient. The nights stretched longer than they had to. Sleep became a skill I had to relearn. I began leaving the radio on a talk show that I hated because the human cadence and neutral voices made me feel less alone. I moved my bed so it didn't face the doorway directly and coaxed the lamp into different positions to break the light signature. Sometimes I would turn the recording on and watch it back, looking for gaps and for intrusions. One recording showed a quiet, ordinary frame of the doorway, and then in a slack half-second, a small, nearly imperceptible change in the grain of the video, like a breath held too long. I scrubbed the footage frame by frame and found, if you allow yourself the language of speculation, something like a silhouette where the pixels seemed to gather and then dissolve. The forensic people said that could be compression artifact. The neighbor said the camera's sensor might blink in low light. Each explanation was reasonable and left a cold space where my certainty might have been. The messages eventually made something else apparent. The sender cared about my reaction. They varied their approach, sometimes gentle and sometimes clinical. On a Wednesday when the rain had been light and the city smelled of wet asphalt and bread from a bakery down the block, they sent a photo of the pillow on my bed, not in the night, but in broad daylight, the imprint of a head visible as if someone had just left. With it, they sent a line of text. You were dreaming of your father. It hit me with the odd intimacy of a hand closing over a small, tender part of me. It was not violent. It was not a threat. It was a statement meant to pierce and proof that they could be close when I thought myself private. I pressed my forehead to the cool pane of the window that night and watched the rain smear the city into a soft, indifferent watercolor. I thought about the one person I had not told about the messages, my father's sister, an aunt I had spoken to infrequently but who knew family history, who knew secrets I had not wished to make public. When I told her, her voice on the phone was small and steady, and she said something I did not expect. When things like this happen, sometimes people are clumsy, and sometimes they are trying to be seen. Sometimes what is important is not that you find who did it, but that you re-establish the boundaries. It was practical and gentle and offered me a way forward. One evening, I decided to create a test. I wrote, on a sticky note, a random sentence. Not about my habits. Not a fact from the room. Just a silly sentence. The window will smell like orange peel tomorrow. I stuck it to the inside of my wardrobe so it could not be seen. 2 days later, my phone buzzed, and a new photo showed the wardrobe door barely ajar, and in the door's reflection, the edge of a sticky note. Their caption read, "You think in poetry tonight." It was not proof in the way I wanted. It was proof in the way that a mirror proves a reflection. It responded to my movement and to my intent. The anonymity remained, but the sender's attentions had become an interplay between my attempts at secrecy and their patient cataloging. It made the apartment feel like a stage where someone else knew the script better than I did. Months passed, or at least the record of months did. The city continued to rain on and off, seasons shading the light through my curtains in different ways. The messages tapered and then blossomed again, as if the sender chose their moments like the careful bursts of a slow-burning fire. I found strange comfort in the small things that did not change. The chipped rim of the mug, the blue elephant, the way the kettle sings at a particular pitch. In the middle of this strange catalog, I developed a practice of noting things I would want kept private. I put a list inside a drawer. Names of people I did not want photographed. Things I wanted to remain unseen. It read like a manifesto for living small, stubborn acts of ownership. I knew it could be useless, and that knowledge did not stop me. The twist came in a message that, when it arrived, was almost polite. The photograph was of my living room as seen from the very edge of the balcony, a view I had never allowed anyone to have. The caption under it was short, in sentences that resembled a person clearing their throat before speaking. "You will leave soon." I read it again. The sentence was neither a threat nor a promise. It was a statement of timing, precise and calm. I considered all the literal meanings. Move away, leave the apartment, leave the city. I considered the metaphoric leave, a life, leave a memory. I asked the message, fumbling because the old curiosity that started this whole thing was still alive. "What do you mean?" For a long time there was nothing. A pause in the rain. A silence in the phone that felt like waiting for someone to return home. Then the reply came, and it was not a message, but a photograph of a different frame, my own face. As if someone had taken a quick, grainy shot with their phone aimed from the hallway. My expression caught half in thought and half in a tired, private resignation. The caption was a single, unexpected line. "You already left." That line lodged and broadened like a shadow. You already left. It could mean one of 1,000 things, any of which would be true in some corner of my life. Perhaps I had already left, years ago, when I stopped seeing friends, or when I left the place I was born. Perhaps my life had become a sequence of small departures. The words pressed against me with the quiet authority of someone who had watched and concluded. They were not cruel. They were crisp, like the index of an archive that had drawn a line through my life and announced a transition. The next morning I found, tucked under the elephant's tiny trunk, a small note in the same handwriting as the photo on the sidewalk. "Pack something you love." It was absurd and tender, and it felt like the end of a small conversation. I did not leave immediately. The months wore on with that peculiar, low fever of someone negotiating an unasked for intimacy. Sometimes the messages would bead again like rain, and then fade. Sometimes they would flit back to a photograph of a trivial thing, the way light hit a cereal bowl, and sometimes, too, something that felt suffocatingly accurate. The ambiguity became its own haunt. Did the sender want me to go, or were they merely noting that I had already changed? In the quiet of the apartment, I learned to sleep with the radio and to make a ritual of setting the kettle to boil at 8, because that small, controlled noise steadied me. In the end, the last photograph I received in that stretch was not of the room, but a simple shot of the building's roof under a thin rain frosting. The caption beneath it reading, "You are safe to leave now." I took it as permission and packed a small bag the way you packed for a night train, a sweater, the mug I could not bear to give up, the notebook where I had scratched small lists. I left a letter on the table for myself that was equal parts apology and explanation. If I could not understand why I had been watched, at least I could name the things I loved and keep them moving with me. I moved out quietly the next week. The hallways smelled like paint and wet wood, as if the building itself had been freshly sealed to forget the past. I left the apartment, with a pair of hands that had grown careful and a small, luminous relief that came from making a choice in the face of being chosen. For weeks after, the messages stopped. Perhaps moving removed the immediate possibility of photographing my interior. Or perhaps the person who had followed the domestic map simply lost interest. People do. I slept in a different room and found that sleep returned like a patient friend. I told myself that was the end of it, and tried, with the clumsy optimism of someone who has learned to live within new borders, to make that true. Months later, late one evening when the city smelled of fresh asphalt and warm bread from a bakery that had opened on the corner, my phone buzzed again. The number was different. The contact still unknown. I braced a quiet, practiced response. The message contained a photograph of the blue ceramic elephant I had finally decided to leave behind on the dresser in that other apartment. The one I thought I could not let go of. The elephant sat in the center of the frame, perfectly still, the chipped rim of the mug beside it. Behind the elephant, in the reflection of the silver frame, I could see a sliver of a room I no longer recognized. My living room, yes, but altered. On the couch sat someone reading a book with the exact posture I used to assume on rainy evenings. The caption read, simply, "You were right to take it." Then, beneath it, a smaller line that made the hairs at the back of my neck lift with a curious, unnameable feeling. It needed to be where you left it. I stared at the screen until the rain outside my new window blurred into long lines that the streetlight turned silver. The message suggested more than surveillance. It suggested a quiet agency, an editorial hand that rearranged things for reasons I could not fathom. I thought of the sticky note experiment, and the neighbor's camera, and the patient forensics, and how little of it had actually changed the essential strangeness. Someone had been inside my life. Carefully, as one might be inside a house that holds fragile things. The sender did not threaten or break. They curated and observed. That last message, months after I had left, read like a final, odd benediction. The rain continued its slow discourse with the city, and I rolled the sentence around in my mouth like an unfamiliar coin. You were right to take it. I wondered whether I had ever really believed I had left anything at all. The apartment had been a center I thought I had the right to guard, and perhaps I had. But the rightness of taking something lies in the mercy of the one who watches and decides what belongs where. I put the phone down and let the rain tell its soft, weathered stories against the pain. The thought that settled in me that night was not violent or angry, but slow and oddly tender. Someone had traced the edges of my life, edited its frames, and in their patience had taught me that privacy can be given and taken in small increments. The last image remained on my screen as if waiting for me to make of it the ending I wanted. Outside, the rain kept writing its indifferent lines on the city. Inside, the elephant on the dresser kept its small, chipped smile. I slept with the radio steady and a light on the hall, and in the middle of the night, in the slow hour when dreams are thin and the rain is nearer than distant memory, my phone vibrated once more. The screen showed a photograph taken not of a room but of a door slightly open, the darkness beyond it folded in like a hand. Its caption was a single sentence, calm as a closed eyelid. You already knew. It was a typical evening when I found myself walking down the familiar streets of the city. The city had always been a mixture of noise, light, and motion, yet, in that moment, it felt strangely quiet. I had just moved back to this place after years of being away. The buildings and streets were a blend of nostalgia and unfamiliarity. The same landmarks I had known, but everything seemed slightly out of place now. Like a dream that couldn't quite capture its original form. I wasn't sure what had brought me here. A vague desire to reconnect with the past, to find something that had once belonged to me. The city felt like a memory, like I was walking through the remnants of a life I had abandoned. I was lost in my thoughts when I passed by a small, dimly lit shop. It was the kind of place you wouldn't notice if you weren't looking for it. The neon sign above the door flickered as it always had, a soft buzzing hum that seemed to reverberate in the cool evening air. The sign itself was old, the edges of the letters flickering intermittently as though the bulb behind it were struggling to stay alive. But then, for just a moment, the flicker paused, and the neon light blinked. The letters on the sign shifted. For a split second, it spelled out my childhood nickname, *** Nino. ****. I froze in my tracks. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a strange chill ran through me. ****, Nino ****. It was a name only my family and a few close childhood friends had ever called me. It was a nickname I hadn't heard in years, not since I was a child. And yet, there it was, glowing in neon above the door, as if it had been waiting for me, as if the sign had been waiting to reveal something only I could recognize. I looked around instinctively, expecting to see someone else noticing it, someone else reacting to this bizarre coincidence. But there was no one. The street was empty, the city was still, and the neon sign buzzed quietly, its letters flashing and dimming as though it were a secret, a message meant just for me. I stepped closer to the window, my pulse quickening, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The glass was fogged up from the inside, and I could barely make out anything through the haze. The shop appeared abandoned, its shelves dark and empty, a place that seemed as forgotten as the name on the sign. But something told me it wasn't by accident that I had seen it. Something in the air, a feeling I couldn't shake, told me this was no coincidence. I had to go inside. I didn't know why, but something was pulling me toward it. Some unseen force urging me to take a step closer. The door creaked open as I pushed it, and a small bell above the door jingled softly. The air inside was stale, heavy with the smell of dust and old wood. I could barely see anything beyond the immediate area, the shop dimly lit by a single hanging light. The shelves were filled with trinkets and oddities, things I couldn't immediately identify, forgotten objects that had outlasted their usefulness. It was the kind of shop that felt like it belonged to another era, another time. I took a few hesitant steps forward, the wooden floor creaking beneath my feet. My eyes scanned the room, but there was no sign of anyone. It was as if I had stepped into a world of my own. Everything felt surreal, disconnected from the world outside. The only sound was the faint hum of the neon sign from the window, and the soft shuffling of my footsteps across the floor. As I moved deeper into the store, I felt an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. There was something about the place that felt familiar, like I had been here before, even though I was sure I hadn't. The walls were lined with old photographs, dusty frames with faces I didn't recognize. But in the corner of my eye, something caught my attention. A small, weathered box on a shelf near the back of the store, hidden behind a stack of books. It called to me. I walked over to it, the strange pull inside me growing stronger with every step. When I reached the box, I hesitated, my fingers hovering just above it. It was small, no larger than a shoebox, with a simple clasp on the front. It looked like something out of an old memory, something that shouldn't have been in a shop like this. I felt almost guilty for touching it, as though it wasn't meant for anyone to find. But I opened it anyway. Inside, there was nothing but a single piece of folded paper. I unfolded it slowly, almost afraid to see what was written on it. The handwriting was messy, scrawled hastily, as if someone had written it in a rush without thinking. And when I saw what was written, my breath caught in my throat. The paper read, "Asterisk, asterisk, you remember, don't you? It's all been waiting for you." Asterisk, asterisk, I felt my knees go weak, the room spinning slightly as I tried to make sense of it. How did they know? How did the shop, or whoever had left this message, know my nickname? The one no one had used in years. Before I could think any more about it, I heard a faint sound, a voice low and distant, calling from somewhere deep within the shop. I turned toward the sound, my heart racing. It was a voice I recognized, but it was impossible. It was my mother's voice, the one I hadn't heard in years. "Nino," she whispered, so softly it was barely audible. I spun around, my breath caught in my throat, but there was no one there. The shop was empty, the shelves still and silent. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I was no longer sure if I was dreaming or awake. The door creaked open behind me, and a gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the dim light and leaving me in darkness. I rushed toward the door, the sense of urgency now overwhelming me. I had to leave. I didn't know why, but the feeling of being watched, of something following me, was too much. As I stepped out into the street, the neon sign blinked again. The name faded. Asterisk, asterisk, Nino, asterisk, asterisk, vanished. And in its place, the sign flickered and showed a new message. Asterisk, asterisk, it's not over. It never was. Asterisk, asterisk, I turned and ran, not daring to look back. I couldn't. Something about that place, about the sign, about the message, was more than I could understand. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was waiting for me. And I couldn't escape it. It was a typical night in the city, the kind where the streetlights flicker and hum in the distance, casting long shadows on the pavement as people hurriedly walk to their destinations. I was on the bus, heading home from a late shift at work. The bus was empty, save for a few passengers, and I sank into the worn seat by the window, staring out into the blurry night, watching the city go by. The window was cold against my cheek, and the rhythmic sound of the wheels against the road was strangely comforting. I didn't have much on my mind, nothing more than the usual exhaustion and the thoughts of what I would do once I got home. I had grown used to the quietness of these late-night bus rides. The stillness was familiar, and for some reason, it brought me a sense of peace, despite the late hour. The city outside looked the same as it always did. Streets lined with tall buildings, the occasional car passing by, the dim glow of neon lights reflecting off the wet asphalt. But then something strange happened. I wasn't sure when I first noticed it, but there was something off about the way the city was moving. The lights, the shadows, the buildings, they all began to blur. It wasn't the normal kind of blurriness that comes with a foggy night or the soft, hazy vision of tired eyes. No, this was different. The edges of the world outside began to melt. Slowly, like paint sliding off a canvas. The concrete buildings started to distort and lose their sharpness, and the streets seemed to ripple. I blinked, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, it was real. The city, the place I had always known, the city that had always felt solid and unchanging, was starting to fade away. My heart began to beat faster. I leaned forward, pressing my face closer to the window, trying to make sense of it. The cars outside weren't driving anymore. They were sliding like melting wax, their shapes contorting and vanishing into the blurry haze. The lights, the bright piercing lights of the city, flickered one by one, and then disappeared entirely. I felt a chill run down my spine. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure, standing just outside the window, its shape barely discernible through the fog, a woman. She was standing on the sidewalk, but unlike anything else around her, she wasn't moving. Her figure was still, almost unnatural, as though she were a part of the mist itself. She wasn't tall, nor was she particularly remarkable in appearance, but there was something about her that made my stomach tighten. She tapped the window. Once, softly, but the sound was sharp in the quiet of the bus. The tap was so clear, so precise, that it felt like a command, like something was beckoning me to look closer. I did, despite every instinct screaming at me to look away, to ignore her, to pretend nothing was happening. As I stared at her, the city outside continued to distort, its edges curling and peeling away, like a painting dissolving in the rain. The buildings, once firm and grounded, now twisted into surreal shapes, like things from a dream or nightmare. The ground beneath them was shifting too, rippling as though it were made of liquid. The woman's eyes never left mine. I couldn't see them clearly at first. They were hidden beneath the shadow of her hood, but I felt them. They were piercing, unnerving. It was as if she was watching me, studying me, waiting for me to react. The tap echoed in my mind, louder than it had been in the moment. And then, before I could fully comprehend what was happening, the bus came to an abrupt stop. The sudden jolt threw me forward, and I had to grab the seat in front of me to steady myself. The bus had not reached my stop. We weren't even close, but something inside me told me that wasn't what mattered. I turned back to the window. The city was gone. There was nothing but a vast, empty void beyond the glass, like the entire world had been swallowed up. The bus now seemed suspended in a place where time and space didn't make sense. The woman was gone. Everything was gone, except for the fog, the quiet, and the overwhelming sense of disconnection. The bus driver hadn't moved. He hadn't said a word. His face was blank, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, though the road was no longer there. It was as if he, too, were trapped in this moment, lost in the same confusion I was. I opened my mouth to say something, to ask what was going on, but nothing came out. My voice was swallowed by the stillness. And then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, the woman's voice, soft and cold, filled the bus. "You're here now," she said, her voice echoing around me, though she was nowhere to be seen. "You've crossed over." The words felt like a weight, pressing down on my chest. I didn't know what they meant, or how I could possibly have crossed over. Was I dead? Was I dreaming? I tried to move, tried to get up, but I couldn't. My body felt heavy, like it wasn't my own, like I was stuck in someone else's life, in someone else's world. I tried to look out the window again, hoping to see something, anything, that resembled reality, but there was nothing. No city, no street, no cars or buildings. Just a void stretching out endlessly before me, infinite and empty. I don't know how much time passed. It could have been minutes, or it could have been hours. I was paralyzed in that bus, trapped in a place where nothing made sense. The world outside had melted away, and with it, all sense of where I was, who I was. Everything was slipping through my fingers like water. And then, as if in answer to my silent plea, the bus began to move again. Slowly at first, and then faster, picking up speed, hurtling into the unknown. I could feel the air shifting around me, the faintest breeze creeping in through the cracked window, but I couldn't bring myself to look outside anymore. I didn't need to, because I knew the city, the world, everything outside, it wasn't real anymore. And neither was I. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I stumbled upon it, a poster, half buried in a stack of old magazines at the back of a dusty thrift store. I hadn't meant to go in. I was just killing time before meeting friends later that day, a quick detour as I passed by the street. But something inside that store drew me in, and as I wandered past the forgotten shelves, I found myself rifling through a pile of papers and old books, the scent of mildew heavy in the air. The store was quiet, almost eerily so, with only the sound of the creaky wooden floorboards beneath my feet and the occasional hum of the overhead fan. I had no particular purpose, just browsing until the clock told me it was time to leave. But then, among the clutter, I saw it. The poster. At first, it didn't catch my attention. It was one of those typical missing person flyers. The kind you see posted on street lamps or bulletin boards. The photo faded and the details brief. The edges of the paper were torn, and it looked old, but not too old, just forgotten. The kind of thing someone might have posted a while ago but never bothered to take down. I reached for it absent-mindedly, figuring I'd glance at the face of some stranger. Maybe even pity them for their missing loved one. But then I saw the face on the poster was mine. I froze, my breath catching in my chest. The person in the photo looked older, much older than I was, with lines around their eyes and gray streaks in their hair. The face was unmistakable. It was mine, but the reflection of someone who had lived for decades. Someone who had seen the weight of years pass. I could barely breathe. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing. My name was printed at the top, but there was no date or information about where I had gone missing. It was simply a photo of me aged, worn as if I had lived a lifetime, and under it, The words, asterisk, missing. Last seen 30 years ago. Asterisk. I stared at the poster in disbelief, my fingers trembling as I held it. How could this be? I was standing there, in the store, holding it in my hands. Yet the photo on the paper seemed to show someone I couldn't recognize, someone I could never imagine becoming. I scanned the details for any hint of who might have put this up, who might have known about this missing person, but there was nothing. Just the photo of me, aged, and the date, which seemed to mock me from the page. Is everything okay? I jumped at the voice behind me. I turned quickly, heart pounding in my chest, to see the store owner, an older man in a faded apron, standing a few feet away, watching me with an oddly unreadable expression. "Ah, yeah," I stammered, still holding the poster in my hand. I just found this. It's me. But it's not. It's me, but older. 30 years older. The man took a few slow steps toward me, his eyes flicking from the poster to my face, his gaze sharp. He didn't seem surprised, didn't look like he found it strange at all. Instead, he gave a small nod, as if he understood exactly what I was talking about, and then said something that sent a chill down my spine. "Some things have a way of showing up when they need to," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "Sometimes it's the past catching up with the future." I opened my mouth to ask him what he meant, to demand an explanation, but he turned and walked away, disappearing into the back of the store, leaving me standing there, holding the poster with shaking hands. My mind was spinning. I had to leave. I had to get out of that store, but I couldn't let go of the poster. It felt like it was holding me hostage, like it was tethering me to something I couldn't understand. The more I stared at it, the more questions arose. Where had it come from? Why was it here, in this old thrift store, with no explanation, no information? I turned to leave, but as I did, my eyes caught a glimpse of something else. There, stuck to the wall near the exit, was another flyer, another missing person poster. But this one was different. It wasn't a photograph of anyone I recognized. It was a drawing, a crude sketch of a face I couldn't place, yet it seemed oddly familiar, like someone I had seen in a dream. The hair was similar to mine, the eyes almost too familiar, the lines of the face drawing too close to my own features. I could feel the air around me grow heavier, and I realized, with a sharp pang of unease, that the face in the drawing looked like it could have been me as a child, my younger self. If I had aged like the person on the first poster, I didn't look any longer. I couldn't. My legs carried me out of that store, past the old doorframe, and into the dimming daylight of the street outside. The cool evening air hit my face, but it didn't ease the sudden feeling of dread that had gripped me. I looked at the poster once more, folded in my hands, and my mind raced. I had been standing there for minutes, but when I glanced at my watch, I noticed something strange. The time on my watch was an hour earlier than it should have been. There was no logical explanation. I hadn't even noticed the time passing. I didn't know what to think anymore. Was I going mad? Had I simply imagined all of it? Or was there something more sinister at play? The poster had been real, the man's words, too. Everything felt real, yet surreal, like I was caught in some nightmare I couldn't escape from. I didn't want to go home. I couldn't. I couldn't bring the poster with me either. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. That the face I had seen on that paper, the one so much older than mine, was waiting for me somewhere. That whatever had started that day in that thrift store wasn't finished. As I walked, I kept feeling eyes on me, not from anyone around me, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere I couldn't see. I glanced at the folded paper in my hand, my heart skipping a beat. The face on the poster had changed again. It was me, but it was different. It was me, staring back from the future. It was an ordinary evening when I found myself waiting for the metro. The station, like every other, was dimly lit, filled with the usual sounds of the trains rushing by and the murmur of people lost in their own thoughts. The flickering fluorescent lights above created an almost surreal atmosphere, making the place feel colder than usual, despite the warm air from outside. I had just finished a long day at work, my mind still buzzing with thoughts of deadlines and emails I had yet to reply to. The usual post-work exhaustion had set in, and I was looking forward to getting home, putting on some music, and sinking into the comfort of my couch. The station was nearly empty, with only a few people standing by the benches, staring at their phones or pacing around nervously. I stood by the platform, waiting for the next train, when I noticed something strange. The digital display board that usually counted the minutes until the next train arrived had begun counting down in a way I'd never seen before. It wasn't the usual 2 minutes or 3 minutes countdown. This one was moving much faster, almost as if it were racing against something, against time itself. It flickered erratically, and the numbers seemed to warp as they changed, cycling through different times, until it finally landed on a countdown that read, **0 o'clock****. I blinked, confused, my eyes darting to the platform to see if the train had already arrived. But there was nothing. No screech of the train's brakes, no sound of the doors opening. Just an unsettling silence, like the world had paused for a moment. The other commuters seemed oblivious to the display, lost in their own worlds, either unaware or uninterested in the oddity happening right in front of us. But I couldn't look away. The countdown stayed at 0 for what felt like an eternity. I stood frozen, unable to move, watching as the numbers blinked and pulsed. A strange sense of unease crept over me, like something wasn't right, like I was waiting for something to happen, but I couldn't fathom what. My chest tightened, and my breath grew shallow as I felt my heartbeat accelerate, each thump feeling more insistent than the last. And then, without warning, the countdown began again. But this time, it didn't start at the usual 2-minute interval. No, it began at ***, 5 seconds***, ***, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The display read ***, 0 o'clock***, once more. And I could feel it, something shifting in the air around me, something cold and suffocating. A low hum filled the station, faint at first, but growing louder, more intense, like the vibration of the tracks beneath my feet was resonating in my bones. I swallowed, my throat dry, my palms beginning to sweat. I glanced around again, hoping to see some sign that I wasn't the only one who noticed. But the few people scattered around the platform were still preoccupied, oblivious to the strange anomaly unfolding before us. And then, as if in response to the final tick of the countdown, I felt it, a rush of cold air, an icy gust that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't just a breeze. It was something more, something unnatural. The atmosphere around me felt charged, like the world had gone slightly out of sync, as though time itself had warped for a brief moment. I felt my heart beat slow, my chest constricting with a strange, inexplicable fear. There was something wrong here. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, like an invisible force was drawing nearer. The platform had become eerily still, the sound of the trains, the chatter of people, it had all faded into the background, replaced by a low hum, a constant vibration that seemed to fill the very air. And then it happened. The train didn't arrive with the usual screech of its brakes, or the hum of its engines. Instead, it materialized out of thin air, the familiar shape of the train, but it looked different, somehow. The lights flickered, as if they were struggling to stay on, casting strange shadows along the platform. The train moved silently, its presence almost ghostly, like something from a dream. The doors slid open, and I felt the chill run through me. I wanted to move, to step back, to run, but my feet were frozen to the ground. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the train, its doors open wide, beckoning me to step inside. But something inside me screamed not to. I wasn't supposed to get on. I wasn't supposed to take that step. And yet, there I was, standing at the edge of the platform, unable to move, unable to look away. The countdown had stopped, but I knew in the deepest part of me that I had to make a choice. To step forward, to get on that train, or to turn and leave, to walk away and never look back. It was like the countdown hadn't been for the train at all. It had been counting down to this moment, to this choice I was forced to make. A voice, quiet but insistent, echoed in my mind. Asterisk, don't get on the train. Don't make the mistake I made. Asterisk, the words sent a shiver down my spine. I turned, looking for the source of the voice, but there was no one around. Only the empty platform and the sound of my own racing heart. The train doors were still open. The cold air seemed to seep from them, wrapping around me like an unseen hand, pulling me closer. I took a step back, then another. The countdown on the display flickered again, this time moving backwards, starting from 10 seconds and counting down to 0 once more. Asterisk, asterisk, 10, 9, 8, 7. Asterisk, asterisk, I turned and ran, my legs finally responding, carrying me as fast as I could away from the platform. The hum that had filled the air started to fade, and the world slowly started to return to normal. The noise of the city came back in waves, the chatter of people, the sound of cars on the street, the distant rattle of trains moving along their tracks. But as I ran up the stairs and out of the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something I couldn't even begin to understand. The air outside felt warmer, almost normal again. But deep down, I knew that something had shifted. That countdown, the train, the strange voice, they had all been warning signs. Warning me to turn away, to not step into that train. I don't know what would have happened if I had gotten on, but I've never seen the countdown again. I never saw that train again. And I'm not sure I ever want to, because deep down, I know I was right to run. It had been a long, draining week. Work had piled up, and the weight of it all had worn me down. So, on a crisp Saturday morning, I decided to take a walk along the riverbank to clear my mind. It was a place I often visited when I needed to think, a quiet spot where the world seemed to slow down. The river, wide and slow-moving, always had a calming effect on me. The morning was overcast, the sky a pale gray, and the air had that chilly bite to it that promised the coming of fall. The path along the river was quiet, the usual hum of life muted by the fog that clung to the ground. I could barely hear the sound of my own footsteps, and the only other sounds were the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. The peace felt almost unreal, like I was walking through a dream. As I walked along the bank, I noticed something strange up ahead, a set of footprints in the mud. They were fresh, too fresh to be from anyone else on the path. They led from the dirt path straight toward the water's edge, and they were unmistakably the prints of a woman. The soles of the shoes were shallow, as though she had walked carefully with purpose. Curious, I followed the trail with my eyes, the footprints clearly marked in the soft earth. But as I looked closer, something didn't feel right. There was no sign of the person who had made them. The prints didn't lead away from the river or back to the path. They simply ended at the water's edge. I stepped closer to the water, the fog thickening around me as I looked down at the river, its surface still and reflective, like glass. There was no movement, no indication that anyone had been near it. Yet, the footprints were undeniable. They stopped at the water, as if the person had simply vanished. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should call out, if anyone else might be nearby. But the eerie quiet around me stilled the thought. It felt like I was the only person left in the world, and the silence was so complete that it seemed to press against me, urging me to keep moving. I decided to follow the footprints further, my heart starting to pound slightly faster in my chest. They led me down to the water's edge, where the ground was softer, the mud thick and sticky. The prints were clearer now, but still, there was no sign of where the person might have gone. And then I saw it, a single object resting near the water. It was a shoe, a delicate, faded blue one, the laces untied and the heel worn down. The same shoe that had left the prints. I crouched down to examine it, my fingers trembling slightly as I reached out to touch it. The shoe was damp, as though it had been in the water not long ago. But there was no sign of the person it belonged to. A cold gust of wind swept through the trees, rustling the leaves, and for a moment, I felt something, an almost palpable sense of presence, like someone was watching me. I stood up, my eyes scanning the misty river, but there was nothing there. Only the still water and the soft, eerie silence. I wanted to turn back, to walk away from whatever strange force had drawn me to this spot. But something held me there, an almost magnetic pull toward the river. The footprints, the shoe, the feeling that I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't quite understand. And then, just as I was about to step away, I heard it. A soft sound, like a whisper, carried on the breeze. It was so faint that I thought I imagined it. But then it came again, clearer this time, a soft call from the water, like a voice just barely out of reach. I stepped back, my heart racing. But before I could turn to leave, something caught my eye, more footprints. These were different though. They were fainter, less distinct, like they had been pressed into the ground long ago. But they continued on, leading out onto the water itself. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped closer. The footprints were unmistakable, the same delicate print as before, the same pattern of a woman's step. But they led into the water, disappearing into the river itself. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to look away. The river was still, the fog curling around it like a veil. The footprints seemed to stretch on forever, leading deeper and deeper into the water, until they vanished completely beneath the surface. It was as if the water had swallowed them whole, as if the river had taken the person who had left those marks, pulling them into its depths without a trace. I stepped back again, a chill running down my spine, my mind struggling to process what I had just seen. There was no way back from this, no way to understand what had just happened. The river had taken something, someone, and left only the footprints behind. I turned and walked away, my feet heavy, as though the earth itself was pulling me into the mist. I didn't look back, I couldn't. The stillness of the river, the quietness of the place, felt wrong now. Like it had become a tomb, a place where time itself had been suspended. As I walked back toward the park, the distant sounds of the city started to drift back into my ears. But I couldn't shake the image of those footprints leading into the water, the way they disappeared into the depths with no sign of the person who had made them. And when I glanced down at my own feet, for just a brief moment, I could have sworn I saw a faint print beside me in the mud. Leading into the water, a print that wasn't there before. The river had left its mark on me, too, and I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to escape its pull. It was a strange, quiet afternoon, the kind where the air is thick with stillness, and the usual hum of the city felt muted, like it had been absorbed by the ground beneath me. I had been walking for hours, just trying to clear my mind. My thoughts had been cluttered lately, like too many pieces of a puzzle scattered in all directions. I needed a break. So, I decided to stop by the old park I used to visit when I was younger. It had been years since I'd been there, but something about the place felt comforting, like it held a memory of a simpler time. I wandered along the familiar path, passing the old oak trees and the small pond where we used to feed the ducks as kids. The park was empty, save for the occasional jogger or person walking their dog. I hadn't expected it to be so deserted, but I welcomed the solitude. The benches near the fountain looked inviting, so I made my way over to one, deciding to sit for a moment and gather my thoughts. But as I approached the bench, I saw someone lying there, curled up, their face hidden behind a jacket pulled over their head. I was taken aback for a second. It wasn't common to see people sleeping on the park benches, especially during the day. I paused, not sure if I should disturb them. The person didn't move, just lay there in a kind of stillness that made the air around them feel heavier. I took a step closer, curious, my footsteps muffled by the grass beneath my shoes. Something about them seemed strangely familiar. There was a slight curve to the way their body was positioned, a way of resting that I had seen before. A tightness in my chest pulled at me, but I couldn't place why. I moved even closer, and that's when I saw it, the hand. The hand resting on the side of the bench, fingers curled slightly, the skin worn and weathered, marked by age and experience. But the fingers, the nails, the slight scar near the wrist were exactly like mine. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The person on the bench had the same hands, the same slight scarring, the same way they rested. But there was no mistaking it now. This wasn't just anyone. It was me, but it wasn't the me I knew. The figure on the bench was older, their face hidden by the fabric of the jacket, but there was no denying the resemblance. The same dark hair, the same build, the same way of sitting. And yet, there was something undeniably different about the way they looked. The lines on their face were deeper, their posture more slumped. They had the kind of weariness that only time could give, the kind of exhaustion that felt permanent. The edges of their clothes were frayed, their shoes scuffed and battered. This wasn't me now. This was a version of me I had never seen before. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at them, unable to look away. Was this some kind of hallucination, a dream? How could this be real? I reached out, my hand trembling as I moved closer, unsure of what I was doing. I wanted to touch them, to wake them up, but at the same time, I didn't. I was terrified of what would happen if I did. What if they weren't real? What if this was some twisted vision of my future? I stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching the figure on the bench. Every time I tried to move closer, the sense of dread grew stronger, like something was holding me back, urging me to stay where I was. I could hear the faint rustling of leaves in the wind, the distant sound of children playing near the swings, but all of it felt far away. Everything felt distant. Like I was no longer a part of this world, like I had stepped into someone else's life, someone else's future. I took another step forward, my legs unsteady beneath me, and that's when the person stirred. Just slightly, a subtle shift in their body, like they were waking from a deep sleep. My breath hitched in my throat. They didn't open their eyes, didn't acknowledge me at all. But something about the movement felt wrong, like it wasn't supposed to happen. It was as if they were aware of me, aware that I was standing there, but they didn't want to acknowledge it. Then, in a voice that was soft but unmistakably mine, they whispered, "It's too late to turn back now." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stumbled back, my mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice, it sounded like me, but there was something hollow in it, something empty. I wanted to run, to leave the park, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my eyes fixed on this older version of myself. I couldn't tear myself away from the bench, from the person lying there, looking so lost, the same way I sometimes felt, but worse. More worn. The figure shifted again, this time lifting their head ever so slightly. I could see the edges of their face now, the sharp lines of age cutting through the softness of youth. Their eyes were closed, but I felt like they could see me. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a vision of the future. It was a warning. Suddenly, I heard my own voice again, clearer now, as if the person on the bench had read my thoughts. "You're already here," they said. This is the path. You can't escape it. The words struck me with the force of a thunderclap. I felt dizzy, disoriented, my breath shallow. Was this really my future? Was this the person I was destined to become? Was I already on that path? Without thinking, I turned and ran, not looking back, not daring to glance at the figure on the bench again. My legs carried me away, through the park, down the street, until the world around me started to feel normal again. The sounds of the city rushing back into my ears. I didn't stop until I was safely back in my apartment, locked behind the door, trying to catch my breath. But even then, I couldn't shake the image of the person on the bench. That older version of myself. I couldn't stop thinking about the words they had said. And I couldn't stop wondering if, somehow, it was too late for me, too late to turn back. It felt like a glimpse into something I wasn't supposed to see, something that should have remained hidden. And I couldn't help but wonder, how long until I ended up back at that bench, staring back at myself, the person I had become. I was running late that night. It wasn't unusual. I always found myself rushing somewhere, caught in the blur of 1,000 small moments. But tonight felt different, like the air around me was thick with something I couldn't put my finger on. The streets were empty, the sky dark, the lights flickering on and off as if they were struggling to stay alive. I had to make a quick stop at the corner store to pick up a few things. As I walked past the rows of shops, I noticed an old phone booth at the end of the block, half hidden in the shadows. I didn't know why, but I felt drawn to it. It wasn't something I would normally stop to look at. Phone booths had become anachronisms, relics of a bygone era, barely seen anymore, especially in the middle of a city like this. But there it was, tucked away, like it had been waiting for me. I glanced around, but the street was still empty. No one was near, just the faint hum of distant traffic and the occasional rustle of wind. A little unnerved, I approached the booth. The glass was slightly fogged up, and the metal frame was chipped and weathered from years of neglect. The door creaked as I pulled it open, stepping inside. The phone was old, an antique, really, the kind you might find in a museum, not a public space. But there it was, sitting quietly, waiting. Without really thinking, I picked up the receiver. The moment my fingers touched it, I felt a strange pulse, a vibration running through the handle. It wasn't like a typical phone signal. It was more like an electrical charge, subtle yet unmistakable. I hesitated, unsure whether I should hang up. But before I could make a decision, the phone crackled to life. "Hello," I said, my voice sounding slightly off, as though I had just woken up from a dream. But it wasn't a regular dial tone that followed. Instead, a voice came through the receiver. It was my voice. I froze. The voice on the other end was eerily familiar, yet distant. It sounded like me, but there was a coldness to it, a detachment that felt wrong. I pulled the receiver closer, straining to hear what it was saying. The voice was calm, measured, almost as if it had been recorded. "You're not supposed to be here," the voice said, its tone soft, almost soothing. "You should have listened to the signs. It's too late now." I blinked, my mind racing. What was going on? Why was it my voice? And why did it sound like it was coming from a time I couldn't place? I glanced at the small clock inside the booth. It was exactly 11:37 p.m. The voice continued, as if it had anticipated my confusion. You don't know yet, but you will. The choice you're making right now will change everything. There's no going back from this. You've already crossed the line. I could feel my heart racing now, my hands beginning to sweat. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. What was this? A prank? A twisted joke? But there was no one around. The street was still silent, the only sound the faint hum of the phone. I needed to hang up. I needed to get out of here, but something kept me frozen in place, listening. The voice spoke again, more urgent this time. Listen carefully. The future is already written, but you can still change it. You have one chance. Do not go through that door. Do not. Suddenly, there was a loud crackle, followed by a piercing, high-pitched noise that made me wince, pulling the phone away from my ear instinctively. When I brought it back to my ear, the line was dead. The phone was silent once more. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My breath was shallow. What had just happened? What was that message? Why had it been in my voice? And why did it feel so real? For a moment, I just stood there, the receiver still in my hand, as if waiting for the phone to ring again. But it didn't. The only sound now was the wind, howling softly outside, and the rhythmic ticking of my own heartbeat in my ears. I was filled with a strange unease, like something was wrong in the very fabric of the world around me. I don't know why, but I hung up. I didn't know what else to do. The moment I placed the receiver back on the cradle, I felt a strange sense of finality, like I had just made a choice that I couldn't undo. I stepped out of the booth, my legs unsteady beneath me. The night felt colder now, the shadows longer, the silence more oppressive. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, but there was one thought that kept pressing at the back of my mind. A thought that I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. What had the voice meant when it said I had crossed a line? What had I done that was so irreversible? I walked back down the street, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that clung to me. But no matter how far I walked, no matter how many corners I turned, the feeling didn't go away. It stayed with me, a dark shadow lurking just out of sight. The next morning, when I woke up, everything seemed normal. The sun was shining through my window, and the world felt quiet, peaceful. But then, as I grabbed my phone and unlocked it, my stomach dropped. The notification on my screen made my heart freeze in my chest. It was a calendar reminder. A reminder for that very day, asterisk, asterisk, 11:37 p.m. asterisk, asterisk. It was the exact time from the phone booth. The reminder read, asterisk, call the phone booth. Don't ignore the signs. Asterisk, I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. The message from the night before had been real. It wasn't some mistake or random glitch in the system. The voice had known, and now it was waiting for me to make a choice. But I didn't know if I could trust it. Was I supposed to go back? Was I meant to answer again? Or had I already changed the course of everything by even stepping into that booth? I couldn't ignore it. I knew that much. And when the clock struck 11:37 tonight, I would find out if it was too late to undo what had already been done. It was late in the evening when I received the call, the kind of evening where the city felt distant, like the hustle and bustle of the day had been swallowed by the night. The streets below my apartment were quieter than usual, the usual noise of cars and chatter almost absent. It was the sort of night that made you feel like you were alone in the world, and yet there was a strange comfort in that. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through a book I hadn't been able to finish for weeks, when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen stopped me. Asterisk, Leela, asterisk. I hadn't heard from her in months. Leela was an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in ages. We had grown distant over time, life pulling us in different directions. Still, when I saw her name flash on the screen, I felt a mix of curiosity and surprise. I answered quickly, almost instinctively. "Layla," I said, as soon as the call connected. There was a pause, longer than I expected, as if she was hesitating to speak. I was about to say something when I heard her voice on the other end. It was distant, muffled, as though she were speaking from far away. "Can you hear me?" she asked. Her voice sounded faint, almost strained. "Leela, where are you? I can barely hear you." I looked at my phone, checking the signal bars. It seemed fine. A full connection. "I'm on the rooftop," she said, her voice clearer now, but still distant. "I needed to tell you something. Something important." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't spoken to her in so long, and the mention of the rooftop felt like a ghost from the past. A place where we had spent so many nights talking about everything and nothing. I had to strain to hear her words. "What's going on? Why the rooftop? You're scaring me, Leela." There was a brief silence, and for a moment, I wondered if the connection had dropped. But then she spoke again, her voice soft, almost too soft for the circumstances. "You shouldn't be here anymore," she said, her words floating through the static, each syllable laden with an urgency that made my stomach churn. "You need to leave, now." My heart raced, confusion and worry intertwining.
What do you mean?
"Leave where? What's going on up there?" There was a noise on the other end, like wind or static, and then she whispered, "Don't come up here. You'll never leave." I felt a cold wave wash over me. What was she talking about? She sounded so different, like someone I barely recognized. My thoughts scrambled, trying to piece together any sense of what was happening. "Layla, please, where are you? What's going on? Talk to me," I urged, my voice rising in panic. But instead of an answer, there was a sudden shift in the static. A crackling sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I could hear the wind now, strong and howling in the background. It wasn't like a usual call dropout. It felt wrong, like the connection was being intentionally tampered with. Then, a loud bang echoed through the line, a thud, followed by a soft cry. A sound that made my breath catch in my chest. I jerked the phone away from my ear, my heart pounding, unsure of what to make of it. My fingers hovered over the screen, desperately trying to regain some kind of clarity. But the call was already cutting out, the signal weakening rapidly. "Layla," I whispered, my voice trembling. But there was only silence on the other end now. broken only by the soft buzzing of the phone, the last remnants of the connection fading. And then, as if something in the universe had decided to pull the plug entirely, the call dropped. The screen flashed, disconnected, and went dark. I sat there for a moment, holding the phone in my hand, unsure of what had just happened. The quiet of my apartment felt overwhelming now, the silence pressing in on me, like something had just passed through the room and left an eerie stillness in its wake. I tried calling her back immediately, twice, 3 times. Each time, the phone rang out. No voicemail, no answer. The same eerie silence that had followed the call hung in the air, almost suffocating me. What the hell had she meant by "you'll never leave"? What had happened to her? Why did she sound like that? The rooftop. Why did it feel like I had just received a message I wasn't supposed to hear? I didn't know how much time passed as I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, hoping for some kind of answer that didn't come. The only sound now was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the distant echo of the wind outside. Eventually, I stood up, pacing back and forth, trying to make sense of it. But I couldn't. Something in my gut told me I had to go to the rooftop, that I needed to see for myself, that I had to find Leela. The feeling gnawed at me, pulling me toward the door, urging me to leave the apartment and head straight for the building's rooftop. But at the same time, another part of me, the part that had listened to her last words, was terrified. What had she meant? Why had she warned me so urgently? I hesitated, staring at the door, the decision hanging in the air like a thick fog. My mind raced. I felt the overwhelming need to check, to make sure she was okay. And yet, part of me didn't want to know. I grabbed my jacket and hurried toward the door. But before I could even reach for the handle, my phone buzzed again, new message. I almost didn't want to look, but something forced me to glance at the screen. It was a message from Leela. I opened it, heart pounding, my hands trembling. The message read, ****, it's too late. You shouldn't have come. ***, my breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't move. The words seemed to hover in the air, their weight pressing on me, pulling me back. I looked at my phone, then toward the door, the rooftop just 1 floor above me, beckoning in a way that felt wrong. But then, the thought struck me. The signal had dropped. She had warned me. She had been trying to reach me, trying to stop me from making a mistake. It wasn't the rooftop I should be worried about. It was what was waiting for me there. I froze in place, the room suddenly colder, as if the very walls were closing in. It was one of those nights where the world felt just a little off. The streets were quiet, the usual hum of traffic almost non-existent, as if the city had decided to hold its breath for a moment. I had been walking for hours, trying to clear my head after a long day of work. It had been a tough week, and I needed something, anything, to take my mind off things. So, I wandered aimlessly down the rain-slicked streets of the city, the light from the street lamps casting long, distorted shadows on the pavement. As I walked, I realized I was getting thirsty. I hadn't had anything to drink in a while, and I could feel the dryness in my throat. There was a small convenience store ahead, one I'd passed countless times before, and I decided to stop in. The bell above the door jingled as I pushed it open. The familiar scent of processed snacks and cleaning products wafting into my nostrils. It should have felt normal, like any other store I had entered 1,000 times before. But something was different tonight. At first, I didn't notice it. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge near the entrance and made my way to the counter, my steps echoing faintly in the otherwise silent store. But as I approached the register, something made me pause. Every single person in the store had stopped what they were doing and turned to look at me. It wasn't like a casual glance or a quick acknowledgement, like you might get when you walk into any other shop. No, this was different. Their eyes were fixed on me, their gazes heavy. It was as if I had just stepped into a room full of strangers, each one studying me like I was something completely unfamiliar. It sent a chill down my spine. I glanced around, trying to make sense of the situation. The cashier, a middle-aged man who I had seen countless times before, was standing still behind the counter, his eyes locked onto mine. A woman in her 30s, who I recognized as a regular, had her hand frozen mid-reach, as if she had been about to grab something from one of the shelves, but had stopped when she saw me. There was an older man by the snack aisle who hadn't moved an inch either. They all stared at me with the same blank, unsettling expression, like I wasn't supposed to be there, like I was the one who didn't belong. I felt a tightness in my chest, like I was suffocating under their gaze. It was as if they were waiting for me to speak or do something, but I couldn't bring myself to move. My feet felt rooted to the floor, and my mouth had gone dry. I tried to smile, to reassure myself that it was just my imagination, that maybe I had just caught them off guard. But when I smiled, no one else did. No one even acknowledged the attempt. The silence in the store stretched thick and suffocating, and I could feel the tension building. No one spoke. No one moved. It was like I had walked into a frozen moment, suspended in time. I forced myself to break the silence. Just this, I said, holding up the bottle of water in my hand, trying to sound casual, to shake the unease that had settled over me. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt wrong, like something was missing, like the world had shifted in a way I couldn't understand. Their eyes never left me. I turned to face the cashier, who still hadn't moved from behind the counter. His expression remained blank, but his gaze was sharp, almost like he was waiting for me to say something else, to give him some kind of reason why I was standing there, why I was a part of this strange, unsettling moment. I couldn't read his face. It was like he was someone I had never seen before, someone who had never seen me before. I approached the counter, placing the bottle down with an unsteady hand. I could feel my pulse quicken as I waited for him to ring me up. His fingers brushed against the scanner, but his gaze didn't falter. I was about to reach for my wallet when I heard the faintest whisper, a voice that seemed to come from nowhere, from all around me. It was so quiet that I almost thought I had imagined it. But then it came again, clearer this time, like it was being whispered directly into my ear. Asterisk, you're not supposed to be here. My heart skipped a beat. I looked around the store, searching for the source of the voice, but no one was speaking. Everyone was still staring at me. The older man in the snack aisle, the woman near the refrigerated section, they all stood motionless. Like mannequins, their eyes fixed on me. The only sound in the store, the faint hum of the refrigerators and the buzz of the overhead lights. My skin prickled, my breath coming faster now. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. I grabbed my water bottle, paying the cashier quickly, my hands trembling. As I turned to leave, I noticed something even stranger. The door. It wasn't the normal glass door I had entered through. The exit was now a dull, metallic frame, like the kind you might see at the back of a warehouse or a building that hadn't been updated in years. It felt like the whole store had shifted, like the space I had walked into was no longer the one I had known. I reached for the door handle, but as I did, I felt a tug on my sleeve. I spun around, expecting to see the cashier, but it was the woman from earlier, the one in her 30s. She was standing much closer now, so close that I could feel her breath on my face. Her eyes were wide, panicked, and she spoke in a hoarse whisper. "You don't remember, do you?" I stepped back, my heart racing, confusion clouding my thoughts. "Remember what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. But she didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the aisles as if she had never spoken to me at all. The door, still now, was just a door, the handle cold and metallic beneath my fingers. I pulled it open and stepped outside, the chill of the night air hitting me like a wave. I looked back at the store, but it was just a normal convenience store again, the lights buzzing softly in the window. The bell above the door jingled as it swung closed behind me. But even as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Like I had walked out of that store into a different version of the world. Something about the way they had looked at me, the way they hadn't said anything, but still made me feel wrong, as though I had stepped into a place where I wasn't supposed to be. And as I walked down the street, I couldn't help but wonder, what if that store wasn't the only thing that had changed? What if I had somehow walked into a version of my life where I didn't belong? I glanced over my shoulder one last time, half expecting to see the store still there, the lights flickering, the door ajar. But there was nothing, just an empty street, and the sound of my footsteps echoing in the dark. It was a day like any other. I had been trudging through my work, eyes glued to the screen, with the constant hum of the office around me. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the chatter of coworkers that I only half listened to. I could feel the weight of the day pressing in on me, the hours slipping by in a blur of mundane tasks and deadlines that I was struggling to meet. The city outside was bathed in gray, rain tapping against the windows in a rhythmic beat that somehow mirrored my fatigue. I didn't notice it at first. The news ticker on the bottom of my screen ran constantly, flashing headlines in a cascade of text, like it always did. Local stories, weather updates, national events. It was easy to ignore, to just let the scrolling blur into the background noise of my day. But then, as I glanced up for a second, I saw something that caught my eye, something so out of place that it took me a moment to process what I was actually seeing. My name, it was there, in the middle of the scrolling ticker. Just my first name, followed by a time, asterisk asterisk 12:34 p.m. asterisk asterisk. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. My heart gave an odd little lurch in my chest. It wasn't a common name, not one you'd see floating around in the news. So it felt so strange to see it there, printed in that impersonal, sterile font. I stared at the screen, and then glanced up at the clock in the corner of my office. It was exactly 12:34 p.m. I rubbed my eyes. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was a glitch in the system. Something to do with the algorithm that controlled the ticker. I shook my head, trying to shake off the strange feeling creeping over me. There was no reason to panic. It was probably just a mix-up. But then I noticed something else. The ticker kept looping, and every time it passed my name, it didn't just display it and move on. It lingered for a second longer than usual, as if it was waiting for me to see it. Waiting for me to notice. I clicked my mouse nervously, pulling up the browser to distract myself, but the ticker kept showing my name. It didn't matter what website I was on, what page I was browsing. There it was, right in the corner of my eye. Asterisk my name. Asterisk the same time. Asterisk, asterisk, 12:34 p.m. Asterisk, asterisk. I felt a bead of sweat roll down my temple, the uncomfortable sensation of being watched settling in my chest. I checked the clock again. 12:35 p.m. The name was still there. I leaned back in my chair, trying to calm myself. Maybe it wasn't as personal as it felt. Maybe it was some strange algorithmic coincidence, a program running that had pulled my name from some public source or file. That had to be it. There was no other explanation. But still, the feeling of discomfort was growing deep in the pit of my stomach. I tried to look away from the ticker, tried to get back to my work, but I kept catching myself glancing back at it. Each time, I was greeted by the same unsettling sight. My name, the time. Asterisk, asterisk, 12:34 p.m. Asterisk, asterisk, I told myself it was just a fluke. A weird glitch. I didn't want to make it into something bigger than it was, but the longer I stared at it, the more uneasy I became. It felt like it was somehow... Asterisk meant asterisk for me, like someone or something had deliberately placed it there, just for my eyes. Like it was an invitation for me to look deeper. But look for what? The air in the office felt heavier now, oppressive in a way I couldn't explain. I began to feel a tightening in my chest, an inexplicable sense of dread creeping over me like fingers in the dark. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed something, that the name, the time, all of it, meant more than just a random occurrence. But what? My thoughts began to spiral as I stared at the screen. I had no reason to think anything was wrong, no reason to suspect that anything sinister was happening. But then, the next part happened. I glanced at the ticker again, but this time, something was different. It was no longer just my name. Now it had an additional detail. Right beneath the time, in bold text, asterisk, you will receive a call. Asterisk, I froze, staring at it. Asterisk, you will receive a call. Asterisk, the words were so simple, yet they felt like a promise, a warning, a threat. My heart started to pound in my chest. It couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of mistake, a bug in the system. But as I stared at the screen, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. What was happening? How could this be happening? I shook my head, telling myself to focus, to remain calm. I grabbed my phone off the desk, just to distract myself, to give my hands something to do. The screen lit up, but there were no new messages, no missed calls, no notifications of any kind. I stared at it for a moment, my thumb hovering over the screen, feeling the tension in the air, in my very bones. I looked back at the ticker. The message hadn't changed. It was still there, taunting me. You will receive a call. I glanced around the office. No one else seemed to notice anything out of the ordinary. The hum of the place continued. Phones rang. People walked by, their faces absorbed in their own tasks, their own worlds. Nobody else saw it. Nobody else felt it. I turned my attention back to the ticker, the words flashing once more across the screen. Asterisk, you will receive a call. Asterisk, the room felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in on me. I couldn't stop the rising panic. What was going on? What was this message? And why was it showing up just for me? Was it a coincidence? Was it my mind playing tricks on me? I didn't know how much time passed before the phone finally rang. It wasn't a long wait, a few minutes maybe, but it felt like an eternity. When the phone started buzzing, I felt my body freeze. I almost didn't want to pick it up. The feeling of dread was so overwhelming that for a moment, I thought I should just ignore it, to pretend it wasn't happening, that it was all just in my head. But I couldn't stop myself. I reached for the phone, my hand trembling as I answered the call. Hello. My voice was tight, barely a whisper, my heart pounding in my chest. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear faint static, like the connection was unstable, but there was no voice. Just the static. My fingers clutched the phone harder, my breath shallow. I was waiting for something, an answer, an explanation, but all I heard was silence. Then, just as I was about to hang up, a voice broke through the static. It was calm, measured, but there was something off about it. Something asterisk wrong asterisk. Is it time? The voice said, and then the call ended. I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, the weight of the words echoing in my head. Asterisk, is it time? Asterisk, I didn't know who had called, or how they had known. But in that moment, I realized something that made my skin crawl. The ticker hadn't been wrong. It hadn't been some glitch or random coincidence. It had known exactly when I would receive the call. It had known everything. And now, I was left wondering just how much else it knew. I tried to push the thought out of my mind, but it lingered like a shadow in the corner of the room. The office was quiet again, the ticking of the clock the only sound, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to figure out what it all meant. And the worst part, I knew that the ticker wasn't done with me. It would return. It would show my name again. Maybe next time, it would tell me something I didn't want to hear. It was a strange evening, the kind of evening where the world feels just a little off, like a note slightly out of tune. I had been walking home from the office, the chill of autumn creeping into the air as the sun slipped low behind the buildings. The streets were quieter than usual, empty in a way that felt like they were holding their breath. The usual hum of traffic was muted, as if the city had been paused in time. I didn't think much of it at first, just wrapped my coat tighter around me, feeling the cold air nip at my cheeks. I reached the intersection by the old park, the one I always crossed on my way home. It's a busy spot, with traffic lights that flicker impatiently and people rushing past in all directions. But tonight, there was something different about it. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows across the pavement, and the crosswalk ahead of me was empty. No cars waiting at the light, no pedestrians crossing, just the street, silent and still, like it was waiting for something to happen. I slowed my pace, a sense of unease beginning to stir in my chest. My eyes were drawn to the woman standing at the crosswalk. She was the only figure in the whole intersection. She stood still, perfectly upright, with her hands tucked neatly at her sides, staring straight ahead. She wasn't moving, just waiting. I could see her clearly now. She was dressed in a dark coat, with a scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. Her hair was long, dark, and slightly windblown, but it wasn't the way she looked that unsettled me. It was the way she stood. No motion, no fidgeting. Just this unnerving stillness, like she wasn't even aware of the world around her. I glanced at the traffic lights, which had long since turned red, but there were no cars. There should have been cars. It was rush hour, for God's sake. But there was nothing. The intersection felt like a void, suspended in time. No honking horns, no distant sound of engines, not even the usual hum of the city in the background. Just silence. I took a step forward, my shoes clicking on the pavement. As I did, I noticed something even stranger. The woman didn't acknowledge me at all. She didn't look in my direction, didn't flinch when I moved closer. She was still staring straight ahead, unmoving, almost as if she didn't see me or anyone else who might have been nearby. I stopped a few feet from the crosswalk, watching her. Something about the way she stood, so unnatural, so still, made my pulse quicken. I checked the traffic light again, and then my watch. It was the strangest thing. The seconds seemed to drag on forever. I'd been standing there, staring at this woman, for at least a couple of minutes. Yet, the world around me felt completely frozen. There wasn't even the usual whisper of wind, just an oppressive calm that made my skin crawl. That's when I noticed it. The air. It wasn't just still, it was thick, somehow. A pressure that clung to everything, like the atmosphere itself was waiting for something. It was like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next thing to happen, but nothing was coming. The woman at the crosswalk hadn't moved, and yet, she felt like she was waiting for something. Or maybe someone. My heart began to beat a little faster, and I felt a shiver creep down my spine. I glanced around again, my eyes darting to the empty streets, trying to reassure myself that this was all just a strange coincidence. A trick of my tired mind, maybe. But then I looked back at the woman. She hadn't moved an inch. I took a step forward, hesitant, unsure if I should be so close. Something in my gut told me to turn away, to just leave, but my legs didn't obey. I took another step, and that's when I realized something that made my stomach drop. The woman wasn't just waiting for the light to change. She was waiting for someone to notice her. I felt this overwhelming pull to look at her, like there was an invisible thread connecting me to her, but I couldn't look away. There was a strange compulsion in her stillness. It wasn't like the peaceful stillness of someone lost in thought. It was unsettling. It was as though she was frozen in a moment, captured in time, and it made my chest tighten with an inexplicable sense of urgency. I quickly glanced to the other side of the intersection. Still no cars. Not a single person walking past. Just empty streetlights and the echo of my footsteps on the pavement. When I turned back, the woman was still there, still staring ahead. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like an eternity, though it couldn't have been more than a minute. My mind raced, my thoughts tangled in confusion and a growing sense of dread. Why wasn't anyone else noticing this? Why wasn't she moving? What was happening here? And then, just as suddenly as the tension had built, something shifted in the air. The slightest, barely perceptible change, but it was enough. The pressure in the atmosphere lifted, and the stillness in the intersection evaporated. The air felt lighter, and I could hear the faintest hum of distant city sounds returning. It was as if the world had just let out a collective breath. I don't know what happened next. I don't know if I was just imagining things or if I had missed something. But when I looked up again, the woman was gone, vanished. No sound of footsteps, no rustle of clothes. Just asterisk, gone asterisk. The crosswalk was empty. The intersection was empty. The light had turned green. For a moment, I stood there frozen, unsure of what to do. My mind was trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Had she been real? Had I dreamed her? How could someone just vanish like that without a trace? I started walking again, more quickly now, my footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. But the feeling of being watched lingered, and even though the street was returning to its usual pace, I couldn't shake the memory of her standing there, waiting. And as I walked, I couldn't help but feel like I wasn't alone. The crosswalk was still empty when I looked back one last time. I don't think I'll ever cross that intersection again.